It was a typical morning in Florida. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and the air smelled fresh with the scent of grass. But everything changed in a heartbeat. On May 26, 1990, Marlene Warren, a loving mother of two, stood on her porch when a figure, dressed as a clown, approached her. She couldn't have known this seemingly friendly visitor harbored dark intentions. In his hands, he carried not balloons, but a deadly weapon. In an instant, everything was shattered. A gunshot rang out. The calm of the neighborhood was broken by the sound of a body crashing to the ground, followed by a scream. Shock and panic swept through the community. Who would want to hurt someone like Marlene? A devoted mother, a friendly neighbor, a beloved coworker. Her life seemed so peaceful, but this murder became the most shocking crime in the town's history. What's even more chilling is that the killer left behind not only death, but also one of the most baffling mysteries of the time. Who was hiding behind the clown mask? Who stood behind that mask? The clown who carried out this horrifying murder seemed like part of a cheerful world, but in reality, he was just a reflection of its darkness. But what happened next? How did it come to pass that even the truth behind this mystery remained elusive? 3 decades of unanswered questions, no solid evidence, and ultimately, it seemed like the mystery would never be solved. And while time changed everything around it, this tragedy remained unsolved. It was one of those cases where the person goes down in history with just one question lingering: who and why? What happened to this clown? And why did Marlene's murder leave such a haunting legacy? But in 2017, nearly 27 years after the murder, a breakthrough would change everything. In a world where the truth had been searched for so long, new technology pushed investigators closer to unraveling the case. This became the pivotal moment in solving this mystery. It was a typical quiet morning in Wellington, Florida, on May 26, 1990. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting soft light across the suburban streets. Birds chirped in the trees, and the scent of fresh grass filled the air. In the peaceful silence of this ordinary neighborhood, something extraordinary and terrifying was about to happen. For Marlene Warren, a mother of two, the day was like any other. She stood on her porch, greeting a stranger, one who had come with a smile and colorful balloons. Little did she know, this man was not a friendly neighbor or a festive visitor. This man was a killer in disguise, and his mask was a painted smile. The clown, with his red nose, bright yellow hair, and oversized shoes, seemed harmless. He was holding a bouquet of flowers and balloons, probably the kind of thing someone might expect at a child's birthday party, not a deadly confrontation. Marlene greeted him with the warmth and hospitality she was known for, unaware of the dark fate that awaited her. As she took a step closer, she probably thought she was about to get a surprise, maybe a harmless joke, but instead, the clown pulled out a gun, and in one swift motion, everything changed. The gunshot shattered the morning silence, sharp and deafening. Marlene fell, her body collapsing onto the porch in an instant. The clown, cold and silent, pulled the trigger and disappeared into the morning fog, leaving behind only the haunting sight of balloons slowly drifting away, bright against the darkness of what had just unfolded. The neighbors, hearing the gunshot, rushed outside, confusion and disbelief written on their faces. One of them recalled, still shaken, "I thought it was a prank. Who would think a clown could actually hurt someone? It didn't make sense." By the time the police arrived, the killer was long gone, swallowed by the morning mist. All that remained was Marlene's lifeless body and a community left shattered. The investigation started right away, but the police were at a loss. No witnesses, no clues, no obvious motive. Who could kill a mother in cold blood? Who was this clown, and what was his reason for doing this? Was it a random act of violence, or was there something far darker behind it? And then, the most unsettling question of all, why would someone go through such an elaborate, twisted effort to commit murder in such a bizarre and public way? As the days passed, the case grew colder. "I couldn't believe it," said one of Marlene's friends, still shaken. She was loved by everyone. The case lingered, a mystery with no answers. The police followed every lead, but progress stalled. And then, a chilling thought started to creep into the minds of those involved in the case. The killer wasn't just some random stranger. No, the clown had been deliberate in his actions. He knew what he was doing, and the people closest to Marlene started to wonder, could the killer have been someone she knew? Could someone close to her, someone in her circle, have been responsible for this horrific act? But the answers never came. The police dug deeper, interviewing friends and family, combing through every corner of Marlene's life, for any hint that could explain why she was targeted. Yet every lead turned cold, and soon the investigation hit a dead end. The town, once buzzing with whispers about the killer clown, fell eerily quiet. The horror of the murder began to fade from the public eye, replaced by the everyday concerns of life. But for those who had known Marlene, the pain never went away. The questions lingered, the mystery remained unsolved, and the only certainty was that the killer had walked away scot-free. It wasn't just the brutality of the murder that haunted the community. It was the eerie nature of it. A clown, a figure meant to bring joy, now a symbol of terror. A deadly game had been played, its rules beyond comprehension. And as the years went by, the investigation grew colder still. Marlene's family, devastated by her loss, wondered if they would ever find closure. Would the truth ever come to light? Would anyone ever be brought to justice for the crime that had so violently torn their world apart? Then, after nearly 30 years, a breakthrough came. It would be something that no one could have predicted, something that would finally shed light on the question that had haunted them all for decades. The killer clown would no longer be a mystery. It was a typical quiet morning in Wellington, Florida, on May 26, 1990. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting soft light across the suburban streets. Birds chirped in the distance, a contrast to the dark reality that was about to unfold. Marlene Warren, a mother of two, stood on her porch, smiling as she greeted a visitor. The doorbell rang, and she opened it, expecting a cheerful surprise. But what she didn't know was that this visitor wasn't just anyone. This man, dressed as a clown, was a killer. The clown was holding balloons in one hand and flowers in the other, a harmless image that should have brought a smile to anyone's face. But behind the mask of painted joy, there was only darkness. As Marlene took a step forward, the clown suddenly pulled out a gun, and in one swift motion, everything changed. The shot rang out, echoing through the morning air. In an instant, Marlene was gone. One shot was all it took. No struggle, no time to scream. She fell to the ground, lifeless, her body crumpling onto the porch. The clown, without a word, turned and walked away. There was no rush, no attempt to escape. Just a chilling calm as he disappeared into the misty morning, leaving behind only the sound of balloons popping in the distance. Neighbors, hearing the gunshot, rushed outside. At first, they thought it was a prank. Who would ever think that a clown could actually hurt someone? But when they saw Marlene lying there, they knew. Something horrific had happened. The police arrived quickly, but by then, the killer was already gone. They found Marlene on the porch, lifeless, with no clear evidence to explain why she was targeted. No signs of a struggle, just a woman murdered in cold blood. The only trace left was a trail of balloons slowly drifting away in the breeze. For the police, the investigation began immediately. But with no witnesses, no clues, and no obvious motive, they were left in the dark. Who would kill a woman like Marlene? A mother, a wife, a beloved neighbor. The case quickly grew cold, and the police found themselves without answers. The mystery of the killer clown would haunt the town for years. As the investigation unfolded, one question lingered in the air. Why? Why would anyone want to harm Marlene Warren? To those who knew her, the idea seemed impossible. She was a mother of two, a friendly neighbor, a kind woman who had no known enemies. But as the police dug deeper, they began to explore every aspect of her life, seeking answers in places they never expected to find. Marlene's family, friends, and co-workers were all interviewed, and while they all agreed she was beloved, they also revealed something else. Something darker. Marlene's marriage to her husband, Michael, had been struggling for years. They had been separated before the murder, but still lived in the same home. Michael was known to have a turbulent relationship with Marlene, and some speculated that their strained marriage could have played a role in her death. But there was more. The police discovered that just months after Marlene's murder, Michael had remarried. His new wife was Sheila Keen, a woman with no obvious connection to Marlene, but whose presence began to raise eyebrows. Was Sheila just a coincidence, or was there more to the story? Some close to the family began to suspect that Sheila might know more about the murder than she let on. "We thought something wasn't right," said one of Marlene's close friends. When Michael married Sheila so soon after Marlene's death, it raised a lot of questions. Was he involved? Was Sheila? The investigation into Michael's relationship with Sheila became a focal point. Could the killer have been someone close to Marlene? Someone she trusted? The police began to dig deeper into the details of Michael and Sheila's relationship, but they found nothing concrete to connect them to the murder, just a growing suspicion that something wasn't adding up. As weeks passed, the case seemed to stall. There were no new leads and no one could explain why someone would kill Marlene. The police were no closer to finding the truth, and the town, still shaken by the brutal murder, began to move on. But for Marlene's family, the questions never stopped. Her sister, still grieving, remarked, "We couldn't understand why anyone would want to hurt her. She was so full of life, so caring. It didn't make sense, but somewhere, deep down, I felt like the truth was hiding in plain sight. We just couldn't see it." The investigation had come to a standstill, and Marlene's family, who had hoped for justice, were left with nothing but more questions. They knew that the person who had taken her life was out there, and they couldn't shake the feeling that the answer was closer than anyone thought. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The police were no closer to solving the case. Despite an exhaustive investigation, the murder of Marlene Warren remained unsolved. No one knew who the killer was, and every lead seemed to end in a dead end. The community, still reeling from the shocking crime, began to move on. The news of the murder faded from the front pages, replaced by new stories, new tragedies. But for Marlene's family, the pain never subsided. Her children grew older, but the empty space left by their mother never healed. Marlene's friends, once hopeful for justice, grew disillusioned. The years passed, and the case grew colder. The town had almost forgotten, but her family couldn't. They still carried the weight of the unanswered questions. "I used to think someone would eventually come forward, or something would happen to crack the case," said one of Marlene's relatives, her voice tinged with frustration. "But as time passed, it felt like the answers were slipping away from us. No one seemed to care anymore." The police department, once so active in the case, had moved on to other investigations. New detectives came and went, and the files sat untouched, gathering dust. The case had become a cold case, a label that many feared would define it forever. But in 1997, 7 years after the murder, the investigation was briefly revived. New technology and forensic science offered a glimmer of hope. The police ran new tests on the evidence they had gathered from the crime scene, hoping for a breakthrough. But even with the latest advancements, the results were inconclusive. The killer remained at large. The community's hope for resolution slowly faded as the years went on. The investigation stalled again, and as Marlene's children grew up, they were left with only the memory of their mother and the haunting mystery of her death. "I never thought we'd get to this point," said Marlene's daughter, her voice barely a whisper. "It's been so long, I don't even know what to believe anymore. Is there any hope left?" The answers seemed further away than ever, and the silence around the case grew deafening. It was as though the killer had disappeared into thin air, leaving behind only broken lives and unanswered questions. For decades, the people of Wellington, Florida, lived with this ghost, a tragedy that shook them to the core, and yet the mystery of the killer clown remained unsolved, hanging over them like a dark cloud. The investigation seemed like it was nearing its end, but it wasn't over, not yet. For nearly 3 decades, the case of the killer clown seemed destined to remain one of the town's darkest, most unsolved mysteries. The investigation had stalled, and every lead had fizzled out, leaving the authorities without answers. But then, in 2017, something extraordinary happened, something that no one could have anticipated. The breakthrough that everyone had been waiting for came not from the old, unreliable methods of the past, but from cutting-edge forensic technology. Advances in DNA testing had made it possible to reanalyze the old evidence in ways that weren't possible before, and that's when the unthinkable happened. After years of dead ends, a small, seemingly insignificant sample of DNA found at the scene of the crime was finally linked to a suspect, someone no one had even suspected. It was Sheila Keen-Warren, the second wife of Marlene's ex-husband, Michael Warren. Sheila had been married to Michael for several years by the time the breakthrough occurred, and the discovery stunned everyone involved in the case. How had Sheila, a woman who had seemingly no connection to the crime, been linked to Marlene's murder? At first, the connection was difficult to believe. Sheila had been married to Michael long after Marlene's death, and there was no obvious motive. But as the investigation continued, more pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The more the authorities looked into Sheila's background, the more they realized that she had been hiding something for years, something that would tie her directly to the crime. The shocking revelation came as a surprise to many, including Michael Warren himself. He had long denied any involvement in Marlene's death, and his remarriage to Sheila seemed to have cleared him of suspicion. But now, with the DNA evidence, everything had changed. "I couldn't believe it when I first heard the news," said one of the detectives who had worked on the case. Sheila had always been just a name in the background. We never considered her as a suspect, but the DNA matched. It was her, and that was the turning point. That's when everything changed. The link to Sheila was a game changer. With the new evidence, the police were able to piece together a dark and twisted narrative. Sheila's connection to Michael had been more than just a marriage. It had been a motive so deep and complex that it took years for it to surface. But the real question remained. Why? Why had Sheila gone to such extreme lengths to murder Marlene? Was it a crime of passion, or was there something more sinister at play? The investigation into Sheila's role in the murder had just begun. It all started to make sense, said a prosecutor involved in the case. There had always been whispers about Sheila, but no one ever knew for sure. When the DNA came back, it was a shock to everyone, but it also confirmed something we had all suspected. Sheila had been hiding in plain sight for years. The breakthrough that had seemed impossible just a few years earlier had finally brought the killer into the light. But this was just the beginning of the investigation. Now that the truth was out, there was still much to uncover about the motive behind the crime and the twisted relationship that had led to such an unimaginable act of violence. After years of investigation, unexpected breakthroughs, and mounting pressure, Sheila Keen-Warren was finally arrested. The revelation of her involvement in Marlene Warren's murder shocked the community and brought the case back into the public eye. Now, the wheels of justice were in motion, and it was time for the truth to be heard in a courtroom. The trial of Sheila Keen-Warren began in 2023, more than 3 decades after the crime. The world watched as the woman once thought to be an innocent bystander now stood accused of one of the most bizarre and chilling murders in modern history. The killer clown, whose mask had concealed the truth for so long, would now face the full force of the law. In the courtroom, Sheila's demeanor was unsettlingly calm. She showed little emotion as the prosecutor outlined the case against her. The evidence, which had been painstakingly gathered over the years, was now presented in vivid detail. DNA samples, cell phone records, and witness testimony all painted a chilling picture of Sheila's involvement in the murder. But despite the overwhelming evidence, Sheila's defense team tried to argue that there were gaps in the case, that the DNA evidence alone wasn't enough to prove her guilt. There's still so much we don't know, one of her attorneys argued. Sheila's life was complicated, and the truth is not as simple as it seems. But as the trial unfolded, it became increasingly clear that the evidence pointed to Sheila, and Sheila alone. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman who had been living in the shadow of a violent love triangle. Sheila's motives for killing Marlene weren't just about jealousy. They were about control, power, and a twisted sense of entitlement. Sheila Keen-Warren murdered Marlene to remove her from the equation, said the prosecutor in her closing statement. This wasn't a random crime. It was a calculated, deliberate act of violence. Sheila had everything to gain from Marlene's death, and in the end, she got what she wanted. The defense, however, tried to shift the blame. They claimed Sheila had been influenced by her relationship with Michael Warren, arguing that her actions were driven by years of emotional manipulation. They painted her as a woman trapped in a dangerous relationship, pushed to the brink by the pressures of her life. Sheila wasn't just a killer, one of her attorneys said in her defense. She was a victim too, manipulated by the circumstances around her. But the jury wasn't swayed. After days of deliberation, they reached a unanimous verdict. Sheila Keen-Warren was found guilty of second-degree murder. The courtroom was filled with tension as the verdict was read aloud. Sheila stood silently as the words were spoken, her face a mask of emotionless calm. The families of both Marlene and Sheila were left to process the reality of the situation. For Marlene's family, it was a bittersweet victory. Justice had been served, but it came too late. "This is what we've been waiting for," said one of Marlene's sisters, tears in her eyes. "It's been so long, but now, finally, we know the truth." The judge sentenced Sheila to 12 years in prison for the crime. But the real twist came when, just 18 months later, Sheila was granted early release due to Florida's good behavior laws, and she walked free. The controversy surrounding her sentence sparked outrage. But for those who had followed the case, it was just another unsettling chapter in a story filled with twists and turns. For Marlene's family, the battle wasn't over. Despite the conviction, the pain of losing their loved one was something they would carry with them forever. Sheila might have been convicted, but the emotional scars remained. And for them, justice would never truly feel complete. The case of the killer clown, one of the most bizarre and haunting murder mysteries of our time, had come to a conclusion. But the echoes of that tragedy lingered far beyond the courtroom. Sheila Keen-Warren had been convicted of second-degree murder, but the story didn't end there. Her release just a year and a half later left a bitter taste in the mouths of many, including Marlene's family. The justice they had waited for so long felt incomplete, and the question of whether true justice had been served hung heavy in the air. "It's hard to accept," said one of Marlene's daughters, still grappling with the loss of her mother. "Sheila may have been convicted, but to us, it feels like she's gotten away with it. Nothing can bring my mom back. It's just hard to understand how the system worked for her, and not for us." Marlene's family was left to pick up the pieces of their lives, trying to move forward without her. The pain of her death still haunted them, even after the trial. Her children had to grow up without their mother, and that loss was something that no verdict could ever fully heal. They had waited years for justice, but in the end, it came in a form that felt hollow and incomplete. "We can never get her back," said Marlene's sister, her voice trembling with emotion. "The trial, the conviction, it didn't bring her back. It didn't fill the hole in our hearts. But at least we finally know who did it. We can finally stop wondering." For the people of Wellington, the story of the killer clown was a chapter in their history that they would never forget. It was a crime so strange, so out of place, that it left an indelible mark on the town. The clown, once a figure of innocent joy, had become something much darker. The image of that clown at Marlene's door, the mask hiding the face of a killer, was something that would haunt the town forever. But life moved on, as it always does. The town returned to normal, the whispers of the past slowly fading. But the questions that remained, questions about Sheila's motives, about the role of Marlene's ex-husband, Michael, those would linger in the minds of those who had lived through the horror of that day. For those who knew Marlene, she would never be forgotten. She was more than just a victim of a tragic crime. She was a mother, a sister, a friend. Her legacy was one of love, not fear. And though her life was tragically cut short, her memory lived on in the hearts of those who had loved her. In the end, justice had been served, but it was a justice that came too late, and one that couldn't undo the harm done. The clown had been unmasked, but the scars remained. For Marlene's family, and for all who followed the case, the legacy of the killer clown was a reminder of how quickly lives could be destroyed, and how long it could take to uncover the truth. This is the legacy of the killer clown, a mystery that took years to solve, and a tragedy that left a lasting impact on everyone involved.